conspiracy Dan. I love this. OpenAI did just
I don't think
raise
it's a conspiracy.
$110 billion. Who
Yeah.
knows where
Yeah.
that money is from and what kind of back channel potentially happened there.
Let me get my conspiracy in there while we're on it. There was that whole too big to fail thing about OpenAI where they had hinted along those lines. If you become a critical part of the government and you're helping it fight wars and do all sorts of other things, you do become too big to fail.
Nice.
So,
Wait, no. What if it keeps going even deeper? Sorry, I have to. Because they realize that if OpenAI goes, that'll be potentially the pin that pops the bubble.
yeah.
So the entire drama with Anthropic is manufactured so that they can do this to prop them up because they know it props the entire economy. Okay, sorry, I'm done. I promise.
Hello, and welcome to Artificial Developer Intelligence, a podcast where three software engineers talk about the impact of AI on programming. I am Shimin Zhang, and today with me are my co-hosts. Dan, his operational decisions are up to the government, Lasky, and Rahul, he never underestimates the elasticity of human desire. How are you two doing today?
Doing well. Thanks for asking.
Hello.
You always
How
get
are you
me
doing,
with
Shimin?
the cold open. Is that what that's called? I don't know.
Yeah.
It makes it hard to come up with something else to say because I'm too busy laughing at whatever you come up with.
Then I've done my job well. On today's show, I will start with the news threat mail, as always, where we have the big news item of last week / this week, the Pentagon drama with the various large language model labs, Anthropic and OpenAI, followed by Steerling AB, a model that is fully inherently interpretable.
Means in a minute. But next, we're going to go into the technique corner where Shimin will be telling us about verified spec-driven development, not just any spec-driven development.
Yeah. And then we're going to move on to post-processing, where for the first time, we'll have an interview. We'll have an interview with Martin Alderson about his blog post on which web framework is the most token efficient. Excited for that?
Yeah. Then last but not least, we'll be talking about the latest crisis in AI funding in our 2 minutes to midnight section, where, as always, we determine how close we are to the bubble bursting, not bursting, etc.
All right. And to get us started, let's talk about the Department of Defense / Department of War drama with the AI labs. Rahul, why don't you get us started on that?
So, in January, we captured Maduro from Venezuela, and apparently Claude was used during the operations, which is a whole, no one's really dug into, sorry, what was Claude doing in there?
That was my first reaction when you said that. For sure.
I think we need a few episodes and all sorts of news articles dedicated to that.
Claude was on the ground with a custom M.
Palantir uses Claude, has used it for the past few years. That's why Anthropic is the only model company that has its LLM that's being used in defense operations. It's through their partnership with Palantir. They learned about this and were in a regular check-in meeting. We're asking their Palantir contact about, hey, Claude might have been used in this, and they were trying to get more information. That apparently freaked out the Palantir person, and then they, because they were like, why is Anthropic digging too much into this? They reported it just as a concern up the chain to Pentagon, eventually made it to our Department of War Secretary Pete Hegseth. There are two main red lines. Everybody's heard of this, but in case you haven't, Anthropic has had this in the the contract, since they signed this back with the Biden administration, two main red lines. One is that their AI should not be used for mass domestic surveillance of U.S. people. The important thing to note here is if you're outside the country, U.S. citizens, you can still be, just not on U.S. soil. And then no use of autonomous weapon systems, because they want to have a human in the loop. The models are just not good enough to make the life and death decision, and they should not be putting humans in there just yet. They want the humans to have control over that. The Department of War did not like that. They're like, you can't tell us how to do our business. We want to, once we have access to the technology, we want to run it however we want. One of the main things that this article calls out from Zui is these are not like feature flags or something where you go turn on mass domestic surveillance or turn it off, and same for turn on full autonomy, go full Terminator mode. These are very much like policy things that are outlined in the contract of like you shouldn't use Anthropic's models for these things, and then obviously like if they do, then Anthropic would it would be a breach of contract, and so that's what Anthropic was trying to hold their ground on. Came to a head last Friday. The Anthropic had until Friday 5 p.m. Eastern to either give the Department of War full access and get these out of the contract, or they would stop using Anthropic and label them two contrary things. Label them a supply chain risk, which means this is against U.S. interests. These would be things like people say even DeepSeek, which is a Chinese model affiliated with the Chinese military, still not labeled a supply chain risk, but Anthropic was threatened to be labeled as a supply chain risk, a U.S. company, U.S. folks building the model. At the same time, as being labeled supply chain risk, also that the Department of War would invoke the Defense Production Act and force them to let them use the model. And you would only invoke the Defense Production Act on things that are necessary to you. So you cannot have a thing that threatens you and at the same time be necessary to you. Maybe a good thought exercise for the audience. If you can think of something like that, we would love to hear both a supply chain risk and something that's necessary to our national security.
Although I would argue that DeepSeek is not a supply chain risk because they're not in the supply chain. So there's that, but
Could be if the contractors end up using them or something. Yeah, Anthropic, to their credit, did not want to go back on this. They wanted to keep the red lines in. They feel strongly about the Fourth Amendment. They do not support mass surveillance of U.S. citizens, or U.S. persons, I should say. And then obviously human in the loop. The most famous example of having a human in the loop is back in the 70s during Cold War. Stanislav Petrov was working in Russian nuclear monitoring station, and Russian
launch
nuclear
detection.
monitors are known to be flaky, let's put it mildly. And what had happened was sun rays reflecting off of the clouds somehow on their monitors looked like U.S. had just fired 5 nuclear missiles at them. I'll tell you what Petrov did, and then we'll put AI in its place to see what human not in the loop looks like. Petrov looked at that, and then by protocol he should have reported it up the chain. You report it up the chain, it's bound to escalate. And then we were very close.
That's real 2 minutes to midnight.
Yeah, that's the real 2 minutes to midnight. We were very close to annihilation. But then Petrov correctly reasoned that if the U.S. is going to launch an attack on Russia, they had many more nuclear missiles. They're not going to just fire 5 and then sit back and see what happens. And so he looked at not just at that data, but he also looked at some of the other ground-based radar systems and other things, and they did not support that data. So he looked at all of that and broke protocol. He should have reported it, but he just decided to not report it at all. Later, it came up in the reports. He was reprimanded for that and everything, because, you have to, you're the Soviets, you have to hold the protocol as the supreme thing. But thankfully, because of that, we prevented a major nuclear escalation. Replace Petrov with AI Petrov, which is just looking at certain data, which can easily be faked, right? Even if you don't even have to tell it, this might be real missiles or even reflection from the sun. You can literally figure out a way to feed it fake data. And as long as the model is trained to obey any orders that you give it, there's no way that it would stop in carrying out its orders. Well, anywhere from escalation outright to just fire back if you ever see these problems. You've seen Dario desperately calling this out, but sometimes these things hang on the are soldiers who do not want to follow the rules. Because once in a while, you just have some soldiers who are unwilling to carry out the orders of like authoritarian or something, and that's what keeps us from really escalating things. So they just don't feel comfortable with their models ever doing that. Or their models not doing that right now. They think the models would get there one day, and they'll be capable of doing this. They do see a world where autonomous warfare is a possibility, but today they're not there, and they do not want to concede to that. And then mass surveillance we talked about. They just firmly believe it's a violation of the Fourth Amendment. So all of this happened. Anthropics, they have, as far as I know, still, this is Tuesday, March 3rd. We're recording this on Friday was when they got the label of supply chain risk and all that over Twitter, where all the politics happens. They have not received an official letter, because if you deliver that, then you go through like court challenges and everything. So as far as I know, they still haven't received anything official. It's just that that's what the government would do. Now, Friday evening, after all this, Sam Altman sends out a tweet saying, "We've figured out the same thing that Anthropic just died on that hill, and the Department of War is completely fine with, the things that we wanted, and we've gotten the same things worked out with them." They published people were like, that doesn't make any sense. Like if OpenAI would get those concessions, then that agreement, then so should Anthropic. So there's obviously like, Sam is giving his take on what they might have just agreed to, not necessarily what's in the contract. So OpenAI put out a statement on what they've signed commenting on what they've signed with the Department of War. It says that it would be used for all lawful use, which is the gray area here, because the lawful use, and there's all sorts of like commentary on this already, lawful use is very murkily defined.
Yeah, we don't have much law around LLMs yet.
Yeah, the Department of War just has its directives. There is no congressional law that keeps it from doing certain things. So a lot of these restrictions, Department of War can within, a few minutes decide, here's a new directive, this is lawful now, while it wasn't before. So that's one thing. An example that is in one of the articles from Scott Alexander, where different people had collected this data and put it in there, is let's assume the US is trying to get data on terrorists, and so they tap deep sea cables to try and get data on them. As a side effect, if they also end up getting data on all of US citizens, lawfully they got the data on the terrorists, but hey, if we end up getting a little bit on the citizens, now they have access to that data. They cannot on purpose search that data for like specific people's name, but if they happen to find something about that person, then it's also part of, so they can use it in different places. So it goes very easily from like you started for some reason and you end up getting data for another reason. There's also,
we just happen to have this database.
We just happen to tap into the deep sea cables, and here we are knocking at your door. And obviously there's another lawful way to just get the data is the government can legally just buy the data from third parties as well. These are all different definitions of lawful use and all fall under lawful use, but OpenAI says that they have worked out a deal that unfortunately Anthropic couldn't work out, but they support Anthropic also, getting the same deal and everybody getting equal treatment from the Department of War. 3 specific things. Go ahead.
Oh, God. I was just going to say, the other part that I found odd about this too is like, I was waiting for you to mention it, but that deal with OpenAI had been started on the previous Wednesday.
Interesting.
So it was rolling, I think, well before some of even like the more like truly serious drama even happened. So part of me wonders to some degree if it's just like almost like PR capitalization on Sam. Sam is pretty great at that. So it's like, he's just like, it was already in the works. And then like, oh yeah, well, we'll just, try to fight back a little bit at Anthropic. But anyway, just pure speculation on my part, but I find
Conspiracy Dan. I love this. OpenAI did just raise
I think it's a conspiracy.
$110 billion. Who knows where that money is from and what kind of back channel potentially happened there. Just all rumors, but I love myself a good conspiracy. So.
Let me get my conspiracy in there while we're on it, and then I'll wrap up with the 3 things I wanted to comment on. There was that whole like too big to fail thing about OpenAI, where they had hinted along those lines. If you become a critical part of the government and you're helping it fight wars and do all sorts of other things, you do become too big to fail. So I'll just say that and leave it there.
I see
on
where
my
you're
take
going
on the
with that.
conspiracy.
Nice. Wait, no. What if it keeps going even deeper? Sorry, I have to. Because they realize that if OpenAI goes, that'll be potentially the pin that pops the bubble.
Yeah.
So the entire drama with Anthropic is manufactured so that they can do this contract to prop them up because they know it props the entire economy. Okay, sorry, I'm done. I promise.
So one thing that is uniquely positive, in my opinion, in Anthropic's contract is also explicitly calls out like it shouldn't be used for social credit systems and things like that, which I do think is worth calling out. But again, once you say lawful use and the definition of lawful use can change, you cannot, it would be one of those things where you can forever try and be like, but what about this thing? What about this thing? You cannot really imagine all the different ways things could be used. But an attempt was made is what I took away from that. The other two things that they call out on why their agreement is even more restrictive than Anthropic's. First, they say it is cloud only and no edge deployment, which I didn't feel convinced about at all. You can run AI in the cloud and can totally still be autonomous. So I don't think it's not in the edge, so it cannot be completely autonomous. Just didn't stand up to scrutiny. And the other thing they said was they'll have OpenAI personnel in the loop to monitor usage of these things. But let's be realistic. Any OpenAI personnel or anyone else would be a contractor to the government. And maybe I'm getting my definitions wrong. They won't be a government employee as far as I know. And so in high stakes decisions, they don't get to have a say on what the Department of War. So it almost seemed like a nice to have, but like when the rubber meets the road, it didn't really seem realistic to me that having an OpenAI employee there is really going to make a difference in what decision the government is going to make.
I mean, I don't necessarily want to take OpenAI's side in this, but or really any sides per se, but the one thing that I find odd is that the discourse is kind of talking about this in terms of is if you're going to somehow glue a large language model into a tactical scenario and have a meaningful impact in it. And I'm sitting here thinking about it, and maybe it's my own bias showing, but I think that's a pretty poor thing to do with it. The thing I would use it for would be processing the massive amount of unstructured data that intelligence gathering operations generate and structuring it in a way that's queryable to be useful. When they're saying they're using it in these operations, that's kind of what I figure is they're taking radio intercepts and stuff like that and jamming it all together, and then maybe also using agentic querying systems to help you filter through this crap easier in the same way that you and I might use it to filter through Grafana logs or something like that,
But that does sound like exactly the use case for finding out where the dissidents in your society
But yeah,
are.
I'm not disputing the mass surveillance one at all. I think that's a definitely, especially the dragnet effect. But regarding the autonomous thing, I'm just kind of where are they going to put maybe on a Raspberry Pi and stick that on the end of a missile or something? It feels there's more efficient ways of doing that, but what do I know? And
There
you'd really
was a
want a world
whole-
model, not a large language model.
Someone had a photo of a Star Shield antenna coming out of a drone. It was circulating around recently. So we're not too far away then. We're
I mean, certainly Ukraine was using it for remote control, right? As they put Starlink on.
Yeah, I'm not saying they're the same things as running a model, but we can keep pushing it closer and closer.
Yeah.
And again,
obviously there is a future where that's today, already happening and probably has already happened with specialized models, and at least in a research environment. So
it's definitely happening today. There are two additional developments from earlier today that I don't know if you are caught up on yet, but at some point earlier today, Sam Altman mentioned something about they've decided to hold on with the negotiation with the Department of War in order to refine the terms around the autonomous weapon and domestic surveillance. But then 2 hours later, Sam Altman had an OpenAI staff meeting saying that the operational decisions should all be left to the government as a part of the contract. So there has been kind of a mass migration off of ChatGPT, at least online, over the weekend. And there are a lot of support for Anthropic. There were some, top tier memes about this is Claude. Claude is your friend, old timey World War II poster style. memes that I probably spent too much time scrolling over the weekend. And so it seems like Sam has said clarifying or maybe contradictory things multiple times, at least from my vantage point. He's flip-flopping a bit, which, as we know, is not Sam Altman's usual MOD at all.
Fair.
Yeah, I think all the employees at OpenAI and all the labs, as far as I can tell, are very passionate and outspoken about their work. And I think from what I can tell, he's probably getting a lot of questions and pushback and all that, which is reconsider these things.
Yeah. As much as I kind of do see, OpenAI's point of view, if you're a company operating in a country, you probably shouldn't have too much power over how the government decides to use your tool. I do see that point of view. But on the other hand, if we recall why Anthropic was formed in the first place, it was after OpenAI had this ownership drama and no longer was a public benefits corporation, or no longer is open by some definition of open. And some of the folks who were very much disagreeing with that left and founded Anthropic. You probably know where my cards are in this game, but
we know where your subscriptions are. I don't know about your cards.
Well, but I had a free month of ChatGPT subscription that they were giving off, and let's just say I didn't renew it over the weekend.
Let me add one other thing to this before
you guys are
going to
make me be the OpenAI person, aren't you?
You drew the short straw.
The most positive take I saw in all of this was Ramez Nam, I think their name was. I'm not sure what this person does or anything. I just remember the name. They were saying like this has brought it to the public's attention in these are serious things, and hopefully Congress will take action, because all of this comes down to Congress needs to pass some laws, take more action here, and Congress moves very slow, painfully so, and hopefully this really triggers them into action and is able to get bipartisan support, because I think both sides agree, especially on the mass surveillance piece at least. So yeah, hopefully that's something good we get out of this.
All right, we're gonna talk about this all day, but let's
talk about
let's keep on following
models.
The drama. Yes,
my favorite topic. Deerling 8B is is it even open weight? I don't know.
It is.
Sort of put it in there because it, is my usual shtick about open weight stuff. But the reason that it really made the news list for this episode was because it has an interesting feature that I've not seen in any other model, even Frontier Lab stuff to date. So it's an 8B model. There's nothing super exciting about that other than they claim that it was trained much cheaper computationally than its sibling 8B models. So you can compare it to other open weight stuff. I guess the Llama 3.1 is probably the most famous in that size, but there's, newer ones like the smaller Qwen 3 models that are, folks are still running them because you can run them in CPU on like an everyday laptop that you can pick up and still kind of do some cool stuff with it, locals. Anyway, the really fascinating thing about this is it is what they are calling, let me actually quote it, the first inherently interpretable language model. And what they mean by that is it is a model that can trace any token it generates to its input context, meaning what you typed into it. So they have a cool little demo thing on their website where basically they have a prompt and you can click on chunks of the prompt and then it'll show you how it weighted the input like features in the ML sense to try to understand like how that impacted the output. And then there's a couple other things where you can like look through the like concept attribution where what concepts was it interested in when it generated that response. And then finally, and this is the one that I find most fascinating, is they have training data attribution. So you can actually, in theory at least, link it back to broadly where the information it used came from, which is something that I feel like, the number of times that I tell a Frontier Lab LLM, cite your sources because I want to make sure you didn't just make this up and you actually used a fetch tool or something to pull it in, right? Is quite high. So I find that very exciting because it could be pretty explosive in terms of if this were to make it into frontier models where you can like really understand where it is, and could also be interesting from an intellectual property standpoint too, right? Where, authors and other folks are claiming that their stuff has been, likely has been actually trained on, and now you could prove it with something like this, which would be kind of cool, or prove that it was used in a given output. So the way it works internally is a little beyond me, but I can take a swing at it unless you want to, Shimin.
I did a slightly deeper dive. I didn't see where they talked about the training data attribution piece. I don't know if you looked into that, but I mostly focused on the
It was
concept
one of the,
attribution.
I don't really understand if it's sort of like mixture of experts, I think is how I understood it to work, where essentially there's like a router layer and that layer is used to create the attribution vector that is pointing at which section it came from. And there's 3 sections, which is the known concepts, which is like basically stuff that it was fed, discovered concepts, which is stuff that it sort of like came up with as it was being trained, and then residual, which is things that are like, okay, whatever, we'll just throw it in this bucket because we don't know what it falls under. So maybe you can explain the math to me.
Yeah, I actually think that was a part of their concept attribution. What
just
they
that
did
piece was just concept. Interesting. Okay.
Yes, so which like is really interesting because if you have the vector of the concept that the output is generated from, then you can manipulate the concepts directly. So in one example here, they suppress concepts about fake information and misinformation generation, deception, and you can use that suppression to prevent the model from telling the end user how to spread misinformation about election
without
results.
retraining or fine tunes or anything like that. It's just like
Exactly.
level. Yeah.
And what they did was, and this is kind of, they have a pretty cool diagram of how they did this on their blog. They took a regular trained large language model, and then before it goes from the output back into, tokens, logic for the tokens, for next token prediction, they stuck a head, which is a new vector right in front of the output. And inside that head, they did additional training where some sections of the head was already mapped to concepts that they decided ahead of time. That's the part about the 30 and known concepts, unknown concepts, and then there's some residual. And then some portion of the head are concepts that they pre-programmed in. And then the rest of that head were concepts that they trained the model to learn via manipulation of the loss function. So one of the things they did was they trained the loss function to be as perpendicular as possible in this concept head. So each concept should have nothing to do with each other.
Yeah, I'm slow, but I got it.
Yeah, and then the other loss function they had was...
This is when news threadmill turns into a deep dive. We got Shimin interested in the math, and you...
I just briefly went over it. And then the next one was concept presence loss. So they try to make sure that some number of concepts were indeed included as a part of the output. And then whatever that cannot be explained by those concept activations then becomes a residual. So they also try to minimize residual construction loss based on that. Really clever approach, requires additional training, but I can't deny the usefulness of this degree of, instead of trying to find out, which neuron is the golden gate neuron, it forces the model to instead be trained on these non-overlapping concepts. So then you can just manipulate that row of vector at the very end, as opposed to trying to go look for those concepts, in a giant ocean of weight matrices.
I actually didn't realize that. So thanks. That was super useful.
Yeah, so it's a really cool approach. They are pretty new, right? By GuideLabs.ai. I didn't find too much information about them. You could join the waitlist, but excited to read more about
where they go with this. Yeah,
where they go, where they get the source attributions from, especially. Yeah, because I didn't see anything. But yeah, very cool model. Listeners, try it out. Rahul, do you have anything to...
I was trying to read through how did they achieve the interpretability? And then the bigger curiosity I have is, can you achieve interpretability even if you have a much larger model? Because at some point this becomes you have tons of concepts, and at some point, can you scale it or not?
Yeah, that's the open question, right? Like, if you make that concept vector larger and larger and larger, would the concept be... Yeah, continuous scale. So this is their paper on... they have a paper on scaling interpretable language models to 8 billion parameters. So they probably started with a toy model and then got it to 8B, and they're probably going to try and take it to 800B. But
yeah,
we'll see. Yeah,
nice.
rooting for them.
Be a lot of compute.
Okay, on to technique corner. I wanted to introduce verified spec-driven development by Space K on GitHub. Doll is great. Follow it on Blue Sky. Doll's got hot takes about AI-driven programming. Anyways, so
this is also, I think, the first time we've done a section of the podcast on a gist before. So GitHub
Yes.
gist, here we go.
It is a GitHub gist, but it is essentially a markdown documentation of a particular workflow. And the idea is to combine
I was teasing.
some of the stuff that we already use and know every day, like spec-driven development and test-driven development, but Doll adds this verification-driven development as a part of the workflow. So the idea is to always have an adversary that reviews the work, both the spec and the output, to essentially, come up with a critique and only accept the code if everything that the adversary come up with have been fully satisfied. So it's a bit of a convergence test. So in this toolchain, you have the architect, which is us, the human developer, the builder, which is your AI coding agent like Claude, the tracker. Doll has created chain link that's very similar to beats, where tickets are beats. So you do want to have a tool for tracking your tickets. And lastly, you have the adversary, which is the critique generation that we talked about just a second ago. And the pipeline goes through different phases. Phase 1 is spec crystallization. You usually have the builder create a spec and then verify the architecture via provable properties catalog, purity boundary maps, verification toolings, and property specifications. So it is a little more in-depth than the average kind of spec-driven development spec. And then you have a spec review gate where the adversary conducts critiques on the existing spec, and then you iterate until the adversary is satisfied. And then you go into the test first development, the TDD part, where you do red-green refactor. So it's red-green testing, but there is a refactor part where after the test is completed and the code is working, you hit the adversary to be like, hey, this is missing. This is not covered by the spec. And you send the builder back to it, refactor the code until it's satisfied. That's kind of the main part of this is like, do you spec-driven development using TDD, but have an adversary at each phase that critiques the artifact, and if it's not satisfied, either go back to refactor or go back to the specification portion. You have to say, I did try it with a side project over the weekend, where I didn't use like NAN or something like that to create a workflow, but I basically asked Claude Code to generate a skill for VSDD and then apply the skill as it was developing this side project. I do think that the verification gate is helpful, and the final project, which I am looking forward to sharing with the world, is had fewer bugs than it otherwise would if I just had gone through like, hey, my regular plan and development phase. There were still bugs, but it was better for sure.
Did you use Claude as the adversary just because it's all a Claude skill?
Yes. I think 80% of the time it did just kick off a Opus agent for the verification gate, but some 20-25% of the time it actually used Sonnet as the adversary with the justification that the methodology recommends using a different model as verification. It was smart enough to kick off Sonnet to do that. Yeah. I think that this methodology, is an evolution of all the things that we're doing already versus the things that we're doing but haven't formalized, right? Stuff like refinement and convergence via agents. That's something that I've done both at work and also on my own side projects. So it's good to see it kind of incorporated nicely in a single pipeline. Looking forward to see where Doll goes. With
Could be the next gas town.
It could be the next gas town.
I just wanted to say gas town. I'm not lying.
Well, at least the various agents have much more normal names than polecats and deacon and dogs.
I hope we don't get rid of that part, I just, I don't know.
Okay. Next up, we have our post-processing, where for the first time, we have a interview with the author of a blog post, Martin Alderson. So with the power of technology, we're going to go to our interview And for this week's post-processing, it's my pleasure to have Martin Alderson join us. He is a Hacker News blogger all-star. He's co-founder of Catch Metrics and all-around cool guy. He blogs about the intersection of software engineering and economics with a focus on AI transformation at martinalderson.com. Hi, Martin. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. Really excited to talk to you.
Yeah, so you ran an experiment the other week about which web frameworks are the most token efficient for AI agents, where you created the same blogging platform using 19 different frameworks, anywhere from ASP.NET to, I think, Phoenix was the most complicated one. What was the most surprising thing about your experiment to you, the results of the experiment?
Yeah, so I thought that the initial, so in the article I go through it in a bit more detail, but I did it so the first build was just scaffolding a blog out, the classic Hello World kind of application for a web framework. What I thought was really interesting was that, unsurprisingly, the most token efficient ones were sort of minimal frameworks, so Flask, Express versus bigger frameworks like Rails or Next.js. I suspected, though, that there was going to be much more token efficiency on subsequent features. So in the blog, I detail adding a new feature, adding sort of tags or categories to each of them in the same Claude Code session. And there wasn't really much efficiency gained on the subsequent one. So basically, the minimal frameworks were a lot more efficient overall, looking at it sort of end to end. They were quicker and more efficient in number of tool calls and token usage, building the initial application, but then also a subsequent follow-on, and there wasn't a huge amount of difference between them.
And you mostly used Claude for all these, right?
Yeah, I used Claude Code with Opus 4.6, yeah.
Gotcha. Do you know if it like read docs too? That was the other thing I was wondering, is like how much of it is like the overall documentation for minimal frameworks is going to be lighter just by definition.
Yeah, so I think I did put the prompt I used. I didn't do anything past that.
Like
I didn't drop any docs in or anything. Yeah, I think it was mostly going on its memory rather than reading loads of docs. But it did some of the frameworks had real trouble with just the amount of sort of scaffolding output it did, and it just didn't know enough about each framework, I suspect, to sort of like do that efficiently.
Yeah, Martin, one thing we kind of have discussed a couple of times on this podcast is like, what would the future of new tooling look like, right? Like with the way folks are relying on AI agents to write their code, how would, let's say I create the new best framework tomorrow. Like, what would that adoption curve look like if my new framework is not going to be a part of training data of an AI agent?
Yeah, I think it's a good point. One thing I would say, though, which surprised me, is that nearly all of the frameworks did work. So it wasn't that some just didn't work. I think if I'd ran this 6 months ago, I'd be surprised if even a handful worked with no interaction whatsoever. We shouldn't read too much into the token efficiency. I think the actual bigger point is that even very esoteric frameworks that I don't really have much experience in at all did manage to build a workable blog. They all look pretty good. I mean, they weren't jaw-dropping design, but they all were pretty interesting in terms of like they were styled quite nicely. They all made sense. There wasn't any bugs that I could see in a very quick evaluation of them. So I think from my perspective, it was looking at that. It's not that like some frameworks just can't be used. I think some are more efficient just because they have less files involved in them.
Yeah, our discussion has been around like, how does my new mousetrap framework become popular if no one knows about it? You know, like,
and the LMs are all trained on whatever was popular during their training set. That's fair.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very fair point. So I think there's two separate questions there. Is I think firstly, as I sort of said, that any decent framework that works, if prompted, I'm sure the agent can figure out how to use it. I think there's a separate question there, though, about unprompted, how do new frameworks get discovered? So if you release a new framework, how do people know about that? And I think that's a very interesting question. I think we're really at the start of how do agents discover new libraries, new functionality. It almost feels to me there needs to be some sort of app store, isn't quite the same metaphor, but some sort of marketplace or some way that like this can be discovered. And I think what we'll actually see is that, you used to have these like curl bash one-liners to set up an environment in, say, Rails or whatnot. You run this, it'll set up all the stuff. I think we're already starting to see it, but I'm thinking if you had this very new cool framework, it would say, drop this into your new project, or migration project, use whatever framework you're coming up with, Dan's framework or whatnot, Martin's framework.
Don't use mine.
Grab the docs from here. Yeah, we'll get a better name for it for sure. Grab the docs from this URL and start implementing it there. So I think that's potentially one way. Or do we just end up with this quite bad monoculture of just everything using Next.js and Python out the box, because that's what it seems to use the most. And then the final thing I'll say on that, I do think the Harnesses and the Frontier Labs there is an interest in them maybe doing some prompting of their own there in the system prompt, because if there is a framework which is far more efficient and works a lot better, you may find that I don't know if they do this now in some sort of fine tuning or post-training thing. Okay, use these frameworks because we know that you're going to get, the end customer is going to get better results with them, if not prompted otherwise. So yeah, they've got a lot of power there as well, I think.
Yeah, that's true. And also, like, depending on the context, like, for example, in Claude Code, they would benefit heavily from doing that, because if it's more token efficient, it's less, quote unquote free runs that they're doing on the back end for you.
Exactly. No, that's exactly what I mean. Like, if they're getting annihilated by token usage, which I think we've all seen this week, last weekend with Claude, you've got Boris tweeting endlessly that we're struggling to scale up, and they do have a lot of incentive to make it more efficient, especially on the monthly plans.
Or maybe once the capacity is built out, they have incentive to bloat the inference budget, because the margin's highest on the inferencing side of things. So we don't know where the incentives lie.
Exactly. There is an argument the other way around there as well. Yeah, for sure.
I got another question for you. This is from Rahul, our third co-host, who isn't able to make it today. But he's a subscriber to your blog. He's a big fan, and he mentioned that you posited a very important question about the maintenance of abandoned software. He's curious if you have any thoughts about, what the solution to that will be. Will it be cyber insurance, people who specialize in pen testing and securing outdated things and no one will fix, and maybe, providing quarantine services or something like that?
Yeah, I think it's a really big problem. There's been a lot of discourse. Well, back up. The models are getting so good at finding security vulnerabilities. They've always been surprisingly good at that. I don't think people have pushed them very far. And I think there's been a bit of a backlash from the security/tech community that there's been so many AI slop bug bounties put in that I think people have maybe underestimated how good they are with someone that knows what they're doing exactly. But yeah, so I think we're going to see a lot more vulnerabilities. And I think it's sort of fine, the mental model that a lot of people have of, there's going to be offensive use of these LLMs and harnesses to find security flaws, but that's fine because they could also be applied for defense as well. The problem, which I sort of wrote on a recent article, is that there's so much software that's abandoned and it hasn't got any defensive capabilities. So I think that's a real big gap in that mental model, because you simply can't patch abandoned 5-10-year-old CMSs or whatever kind of software you've got there. So yeah, I think it's going to be a really, really big problem. I think it's going to happen very, very quickly. I think it's going to not happen at all until it happens. I think I saw one article just yesterday, actually, showing someone is doing this at scale on GitHub Action, like vulnerabilities. I think it's a nice use of it versus a not nice use of it. Yeah, the only thing I can think of is that ISPs or telcos just start quarantining a lot more sort of servers. Like, that's the only way that you can sort of look at it, is that we move into sort of a permission model where if you want a publicly routable IP address for your server, you sort of have to prove you're secure enough, rather than now, which is a very much you get the IP until maybe you get blacklisted for some very nefarious uses.
Yeah, once it's been completely owned. And
yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I think we might start seeing proactive. You're getting null rooted. Your IP is just taken off, by AWS or even by your residential Comcast or whatever ISP you're using.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting too, to see the intersection of that and like routers, right? Especially home routers, because like there's already been quite a few problems around like botnets being run out of just like unsuspecting people's like hardware that's just quietly sitting there.
That's exactly what I'm worried about. Like, all the giant DDoS attacks that you see are usually from like IoT devices that have got pawned in various ways. The thing is, a lot of these are on quite crappy upstream internet connections. They're not VPSs with 1 to 10 gigabit uplink in a very, with very good peering. So I think that's a little sort of start of what may happen, which is quite terrifying, really. I think the implications of when you move that forward.
Yeah, you laughed. I was like, that's quite dystopian.
the laugh of sadness. Like, oh
Yes,
gosh,
it's
here
the
it comes.
dog where everything's okay. Speaking, you're the co-founder of Catch Metrics, Martin. Are you willing to speak a little bit about how you are leveraging AI in your day-to-day work?
Yeah, so I think that it's been completely transformation. It's been a complete transformation in terms of how I work, really. So I think a lot of my blogs come out of what I'm actually doing day to day with agents. I think we're far further ahead than I expected we'd be so quickly. And then, yeah, I think just everything's been changed by it. I mean, I recently wrote another article about using open code for pull requests. So instead of having to use a SaaS provider, using open code to just run on your CI/CD pipelines to find issues. That's been awesome. And I think there's going to be, we're looking at using that even more and more in terms of our like DevOps and CI/CD pipeline. Can we just get tickets when we make a ticket on Jira or GitHub issues? Can we just get it to make a prototype of that first? An engineer then reviews, and then another agent then reviews the code of. So it's sort of hurting my head how quickly it's changing, how like as a sort of engineering manager type, how to manage the transformation there. But we're seeing like really awesome productivity increases. And like, I think everything I've been touching with agents recently is like always surprising to the upside. I've never really done something and went, that didn't really work out like I wanted to. The results were pretty bad. If anything, it's sort of the opposite. It's like, how can a simple 2-paragraph prompt end up doing such impressive code review that would take me hours to probably do into such detail? I'm not saying it's perfect, but yeah, I think the upside is very much there, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. And humans make mistakes too. I feel like that's something that doesn't get talked about very much.
Exactly.
And
AI so many times I've reviewed code and missed absolute clangers, right? So it's sort of showing me up as well in terms of how detailed it can do it so quickly.
It's like, especially there's like the sizing thing that I like to harp on so much about, like, the 100-line PR gets reviewed like intensely, by everyone's looking at it, but the 100-file one, you're just like, yeah, it looks good to me. Ship
exactly. Yeah. And I think that's what's really interesting about it, where I read the article was that the PRs are getting bigger and more frequent. It's just very difficult to review that like level of code that's coming in across all the sort of projects I work on and overlook. So that's why I started doing it. I did look at a lot of the SaaS tools, but as I put in the article, I'm just not happy giving like repo admin access to a lot of SaaS tools, especially for anything that's got some confidential stuff in. We're already using open code and Claude Code, so I don't see it's a problem to sort of use that in different ways as well. But yeah, I think in terms of like what we're building in Catch Metrics, we're working on a really interesting new agentic web performance agent. I'm hopefully going to be launching that. We're testing with some clients at the moment, but hopefully going to be launching that sometime next month or two.
Nice. It's
very
cool
exciting.
To see the sort of agentic stuff leaking out into products slowly.
Exactly. Yeah, you can see why that happened.
Yeah, it's like we're already using it in all these other areas, so why not there?
Exactly.
Cool. Can I ask you a couple questions about like I guess really one question about your actual stack? Like, what do you use day to day? Is it mostly Claude? And are there any plugins or particular, because we do sort of have the tooling segment of our podcast if you listen to it, so anything you'd recommend? Like, I'm a big fan of beads personally, so I'm always pushing that on people. Self requirements like that really, that you'd like to.
Yeah, really, it's just been Claude Code in terms of my day-to-day stuff. I've been using open code for sort of headless like tasks, but in terms of what I've used day-to-day, I've got so used to Claude Code and the permissions model. When I switched even to Codex, which has came on loads, I don't know, it just doesn't quite gel right. So there's definitely already some muscle memory in terms of how these things work. I think the one thing that I haven't got working completely due to Claude Code's bugs is language server protocols. I'm super excited to see more static analysis come into it, because a lot of the repetition and nonsense it get into, I think, gets solved with better static analysis on the code. So that has been somewhat broken for quite some time if you've been following the GitHub issues on the Claude Code repo. But I hope that gets more stable, because I think there's a lot of potential there. But honestly, I've probably kept it quite simple. I keep on trying other things. I've tried various UIs. I really enjoyed using Conductor on Mac, but it's not on Linux, which is like a sort of GUI for running multiple at once. I thought that was really polished and really nice. But they don't have a Linux version, so sort of out of luck there.
That drives my choice of Git UIs too, unfortunately.
Yeah. Exactly.
It's something that's going to look the same on every platform, because I use everything. So well, that's cool. Thanks.
So
thanks for sharing.
Yeah, I think the one thing I do really recommend people do, is just have like a scheduled task in that goes through your repo and updates your Claude.md files or agents.md files, looks at the recent commits and just flags if anything is sort of out of date or not matching what your current state is of the Claude.md or agents.md file, and just opens a PR. I found that super, super helpful in terms of like keeping that up to date, because it's very, very easy for it to sort of drift out of sync, and that's where a lot of issues start coming. So yeah, I feel like I should be using more cool, wonderful stuff, but I'm just sort of finding just using Claude Code with minimal skills and minimal plugins works the best.
I mean, sometimes that is the case, right? Because if you load the thing up with like hundreds of MCP servers, it's like, oh, you've got like half your tokens are already used.
Yeah, no, totally. The one thing I have done though, which instead of sort of using skills as much, is I've built a lot of CLIs for just like internal use. So for like analytics, for customer support, for email, I can have Claude Code reach out to these like very simple CLIs. They're just wrappers around APIs. And I find it's really amazing having, for example, a support email, but getting a sort of draft of it written up with the context of all the source code of the project I'm working on. So that's something I'd really, really recommend doing if you're a bit like me and having to do not pure code all the time, is start bringing a lot of your other services like Jira, like GitHub into Claude Code with your own CLIs. They literally take 2 minutes to make, I find, if you drop the API docs in. And because it's got access to your source code, it can just be like really amazing at figuring out issues. So that's one thing I think I'm hopefully pushing the boundary on. But in terms of all the plugins and skill stuff, I haven't really got that much value out of them yet.
So you're not using Gastown 24/7? Like
I'm not. I did try the new. I did try. I know. I feel. Yeah, very small when I see that kind of stuff. I did try the new.
I've never used it either. So.
Yeah, Claude Code's Teams Swarm functionality, which was awesome. But I found that it often just not much of software development was parallelizable. It was constantly just getting blocked on other things. So it was just adding a lot of agentic coordination overhead. Yeah. So turns out a lot of software engineering isn't actually very well suited for parallel agent stuff, I find. And then even if you do use parallel, which I'm sure everyone else has, you've got multiple Claude codes working, or whatever agent harness you prefer, in Git work trees, I often find you just end up with quite a lot of merge conflicts, especially database migration problems, that end up with you just probably taking longer than just doing it sort of one or two at a time. So yeah, maybe I'm not galaxy brain enough. I really think keeping it simple and really turning your agents.md, Claude.md file and giving it access to databases and APIs that you're using in your organization seems to work the best without thinking you're making loads of progress and then spending a lot of time after resolving a load of like conflicts and coordination problems.
Yeah, it's been my experience as well.
Just
I know we're
company
almost
simulator
out of time.
being run with AI.
But Martin, one last question for you. We, kind of our listenership is mostly working software devs who are somewhere on the spectrum of the adoption of the agent-based software development paradigm. Like, what would be your number one advice for someone who maybe uses Claude daily but isn't doing full-on kind of agent-only software development?
Yeah, I think just sort of being willing to like test it loads. So like, I think the difference between, for example, Opus 4.1 and Opus 4.5 was so enormous in hindsight. Like, yeah. And I think a lot of the hype is there's a lot of hype and there's a lot of, pros and cons to everything, and there's detractors and people that are really, really on board the sort of hype train. But I think just constantly like checking in, like as I said, I've always really used Claude Code as the agent of choice. I have checked in on Codex, which I was like super unimpressed with not so long ago. And now I'm like, okay, this is actually pretty good. Like, I'm not quite used to your permissions model, but I think being willing to sort of check in on the new trends, especially the Claude Code, the Codex from the Frontier Labs quite regularly, especially when new models come out, is the key thing that I think gets you into it more, and then giving it a bit of trust. The other thing I'd say is like do some greenfield, like side project work of your own. I think it's quite scary letting an agent work on a giant corporate code base. Yeah. Just build a blog with it, right, and see how far you can get. And I think it takes a little bit of time to understand how to prompt it and how to get the most out of it. Yeah, I think that's my key point, is just keep on checking in with what's new, because the benchmarks don't tell the full story. I think, I don't, again, I wrote a post about this, but a lot of the benchmarks look very small changes. Like the leap from Sonnet 4.5 or Opus 4.1 to Opus 4.5 was like big, but like not huge when you look at it. And I think a lot of us tech people are used to looking at like, CPU benchmarks or GPU benchmarks where you want to see 100% increase,
20%
not
improvement, yeah.
yeah, not a 50 elo point score improvement, but there's a lot of stuff that goes on behind the background which doesn't get captured in these simple benchmark numbers. So I think, yeah, just keep checking in with them all.
Great. Yeah. Well, thank you, Martin, for joining us. And once again, you can find Martin's work at martinalderson.com and subscribe to his newsletter. All the rest of us do. So be like one of the cool guys.
Exactly. Thanks so much, guys. I really appreciate your time.
That works.
Thank you. This was
Thank
super
you.
fun. And we're back. Guys, that was a great interview.
It was.
What did you guys do to me in that interview? You cut me out?
So, do you see this door behind me?
Yeah. Oh, I was
For
in
those of
there.
you listening, there's a partially opened, very mysterious closet door right behind me, and we may or may not have kidnapped Rahul and tied him up in there.
So why don't we get to 2 minutes to midnight, our favorite segment, where we talk about where we are on the AI bubble watch, similar to the nuclear clock from the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. First up, Rahul, you have a article from Citadel Securities, a large hedge fund. Funny story. A recruiter associated with Citadel actually hit me up last week for a quant position with their
Interesting.
REC team. Yeah, not qualified. Also have to commute to Boston. That seems like it would be hard.
Maybe they're
It'll
just
be a bit
impressed
of a
by
long
your.
commute from where you are.
They were
Yeah.
just impressed by your analysis on 2 minutes.
I hope
Future
so.
quant.
That'd be hilarious if they're like, Shimin,
be
we really
qual, I
like your
think, not
takes
quant.
on 2 minutes. You know what's going on.
Remember, friends, this is not investment advice. It's just us poking holes at the AI bubble the only way
Yeah.
we can, which is through the lens of the atomic clock, pioneered in the 1950s by the Bureau of Atomic Scientists, who were trying to measure how close we were to Armageddon. But in this case, we're measuring how close we may or may not be to the AI bubble bursting. I had to put that
Although
in
I
there.
think we also got much closer to atomic Armageddon this past weekend as well.
Why not
so-
both? Oh, jeez. All right, Rahul, kick us off.
Yeah, this article, everybody's trying to get you their take on where the world would go by one of the most awesome names, honestly, that I've read recently, by Frank Flight, Citadel. And some of the key things that they talk about is like the AI technology itself has the recursive self-improvement curve, right? We're already seeing that the new models and all that is speeding up because they're using the models to build the next generation of models and everything. But we shouldn't take that, we shouldn't apply that thinking to how its adoption would go. Iteration can be recursive, but the adoption would still be it won't be exponential. There would still be, like they say, S-curve is the best you can get. So like just the different things that we have working in the real world, physical restrictions, there are regulatory stuff you have to get through, organizational constraints, all of those things are real. And regardless of how fast you can improve the model, its adoption cannot match that speed. So we should keep the two separate. Other things that they call out are, as we build better models and everything, we're going to have the cost of these is going to go up. So at some point, human labor might be cheaper in some cases than the cost of that model. And in those cases, it might not make sense to actually use the model. And then some of the obvious ones that we've talked about in the past, when you get productivity gains, you actually don't see job loss. You actually see even more consumption and everything, which leads to more jobs and all that. Instead, we'll have John Maynard Keynes said that we'll have 15-hour work weeks by now, and here we all are. 996 is the new hot thing. So Keynes got that one wrong.
He said 15 hours work weeks, and we heard 50. And
Yeah.
it just happens.
Maybe he meant 15-hour work weeks per day.
Now, what is 996? It's 72 hours is what you're almost looking at 2 weeks of work in 1 week. And then the final, the couple of sentences that they closed this whole article on was really stood out to me. We have our population is aging, climate change is a real threat, deglobalization is happening. So all of these things put a downward pressure on potential growth. And so they're saying AI might be all the promises we're assuming we get from AI. It might just be enough to offset these downward trends. There is a world where it just nets out that AI keeps us going on the current trajectory, but nothing much because there's so much other downward pressure from different things.
Yeah, that's an interesting take that I've not considered before.
Maybe AI will recommend that we fix climate change.
Let's ask Claude that after the show.
Claude, should we fix climate change? I don't know.
I want to see what Grok says.
That would be an interesting comparison.
It's going to work in our Department of War now, so I think we should start asking it some serious questions.
Yeah. So this the little piece that I'm bringing up here is the Substack post that I don't know if you all have read or not, but it was a pretty interesting. And so this article in the Guardian that I had submitted actually just kind of like summarizes the Substack post, but it shook the entire like stock market when that post came out. So that's kind of interesting. But the thing that was fascinating about that post is the sort of TLDR version of it is they're basically saying like, what if AI works like too well and there's a white collar job crisis and that winds up essentially creating, I mean, we've talked about the term like ghost economy before in here, but like it winds up only attributing value to ghost economy, the actual economy tanks, and that freaks people out a little bit enough that the entire S&P dropped 1%, which they're attributing to that post specifically because some of the companies that he mentioned in the sort of theoretical future space were explicitly the ones to drop.
Yeah, it's interesting that like American Express dropped because white collar workers will no longer be able to buy anything. That's the kind of second order effects that I did not expect. Yeah, from a Substack post.
Yeah. And then the other one that was pretty good was that I didn't expect.
Well, while Dan pulls it out, I want to plug a book in. There's an older book called When Experts Speak. And one of the things they talk about is experts who go on, news and everything, give their commentary. One of the classic examples you see of experts in stock and like the stock market stuff. One day you would see stock market tanks because XYZ happened. And then if it doesn't tank or doesn't go down, the next day you can literally take the same thing. You go, stock market's holding despite XYZ happening. And they're like, either way, it's just a continuous news mill cycle. So you should kind of like look more into these things. So
I see that so frequently on CNBC. It is like almost comical. I just use it as a ticker at this point because the banners don't mean anything.
Yeah. So if these stocks hadn't tanked, you could have still come up with the headline, stock market doesn't respond to this article at all.
Yeah, exactly.
Good.
Or the stock market tanked due to Fed rate pressure for a million different reasons, right? Like gas has gone up, oil has gone up.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm hallucinating this myself as a human and didn't actually wind up in here. I was just like furiously skimming what you were saying, you're covering for me. And like, I guess they didn't mention it, but the thing that like I've been at least thinking about in the same context is that the way that people will pay for things could dynamically, like drastically change in the near future, right? Because like you've got concepts such as like brand loyalty that we have today, right? Where you might either because you always go to brand X because that's sort of like your personal ritual, or, you just like appreciate the way they do business or whatever. Like all that stuff goes out the window when you're basically like, Claude, buy me a sandwich. Claude will find the most efficient sandwich to buy you, and then it will arrive at your doorstep for the cheapest possible price. And like that's going to have a pretty drastic transformative effect on the economy too, because like everything about how a whole bunch of things work is going to go straight out the windows, which I thought they'd covered in this, but I guess not. Whatever. I guess people can hallucinate too.
Yeah, maybe I would, when we all lose our jobs, we can get an unemployment discount for Claude. Claude, remember, I was asking about unemployment insurance not that long ago. Like, My sandwich should
Claude,
be cheaper.
I always said thank you at the end of my prompts.
Give me a nice guy discount. Have you guys tried that?
Yeah.
Nice guy discount?
Is that a thing? Why doesn't no one offers me that ever. I don't know.
The concept is like you ask for it. You're like, hey, by the way, can I get a nice guy discount on this thing? I've never tried it, but it's something I've always wanted to
Seems
try.
like something
You
that should
probably
be
won't get it,
granted
so-
without-
My 2 minutes. Yeah. Block shares went up 24% as companies slash almost 45% of the workforce last week.
That one was just painful to read.
Yeah. Now, according to Jack Dorsey, the layoffs are because of AI and AI-related productivity gains. I'm not saying I believe it, but what
AI
this does...
washing is definitely a thing.
Right. But what this does remind me of is when Elon did a massive round of layoffs at Twitter, or X, the artist formerly known as Twitter, 2-3 years ago now. And the market rewarded Block for this, which probably will, as a second order, will lead to other folks believing that AI is effective at replacing workers, which would probably be an indicator that folks think AI works and therefore lead to more AI investment. I'm not saying
saying it doesn't work.
I'm not saying it doesn't work. I'm saying regardless of whether or not it works, folks are gonna take it to be that AI is a massive productivity gain, and therefore should
right, like in the
market
way
will see it that way.
Elon made it okay to do deep cuts for tech.
Yeah, yep.
So
It's a
everybody did
permission
deep cuts for
structure.
tech. Yeah.
My favorite part of this is going back to the LinkedIn shared is the third paragraph. B2B SaaS is less than 0.5% of US GDP. It's simply not an important industry relative to anything macroeconomic. I felt hurt about that. I was just like, all of us, it was just
Got me
like
right in the career.
Yeah, exactly. All you B2B SaaS guys, no one cares. So Eli is a great, he has great taste, smart guy. I like his takes on.
I thought you were going to say Eli is a great hater, which is probably also true.
So
He thinks, as far as I can tell, he thinks things through.
So speaking of thinking things through, where does all this all over the map dart throwing of news get us in terms of 2 minutes this
Great
week?
segue. We were at 2 minutes and 15 seconds. Anyone got a number they want to throw out there?
Well, here's a hot take. I want to move it further back, but not because of any of the articles that we pulled for this, purely because of the Pentagon OpenAI contract. Because I think that if OpenAI is able to do a little bit better with that money, then was that an existing contract or no? I don't think so, right?
New contract.
Yeah.
Anthropic, it seemed like, was the only one in the government through
Then
Palantir. So this
that
would be new.
may prop them up a little bit. And in my mind, for better or for worse, they're still the pin that pops the bubble, at least as far as frontier companies.
That's fair. My thought was we don't know if the government is actually designating Anthropic as a supply chain.
They're still using
risk.
it. I heard that
the
Iran strikes were planned using Anthropic.
Yeah, you
stuff.
can't rip it out. It's thoroughly embedded in Palantir systems. So.
Yeah.
If they did, I will move us much, much closer because Anthropic is also very much tangled with AWS and I think I want to say Google.
Yeah. And
So
folks, this is why you should use Open Router or Google Vertex so that you can easily switch your models in case it's not doing what you want it to do.
Mm-hmm. But I agree with you, Dan. I think we can move it back. Given that no news is good news, although a lot of news did happen.
Yeah, and I guess arguably you could look at the block news as like, well, maybe now we are seeing economic impact so that IE is working. And if it is working, then less bubble risk.
Right.
I don't know. Again, this is not financial advice. I'm just
moving
shooting from the hip that you can't see on my webcam or here.
You said
on
3
the
minutes?
podcast. We don't have to go back 3, but like back a little bit.
Okay.
2:30.
Three random podcast guys on one tiny corner of the internet feel more optimistic about the future despite dooming reports
all
and
the
block
signals to the
layouts.
contrary.
Yeah.
every day.
Despite
Stocks do
AWS
not
going
care.
down due to a missile strike. Yeah, we feel better about AI at least. Okay, let's do
It is going to take our jobs. We did it, guys.
Let's do 2 minutes and 45 seconds. We're feeling better about the prospects of AI taking our jobs. Okay, well, let's go with 2 minutes and 45 seconds then. And with that, that's the show. Thank you for joining us for another conversation this week. If you like the show, if you learned something new, please share the show with a friend. You can also leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It helps people to discover the show, and we really appreciate it. If you have a segment idea, a question for us, or a topic you want us to cover, shoot us an email at humans@adipod.ai. We'd love to hear from you. You can find the full show notes, transcripts, and everything else mentioned today at www.adipod.ai. Thank you again for listening, and we'll catch you on next week's episode.
Thanks, folks.
Cheers.